Hey guys, I am recording this in my what used to be guest room and is now our makeshift classroom. So I have a mattress against the wall behind me, and my kids are watching a movie that you may be able to hear in the background, but hopefully you can focus on what I'm saying and not the noises of a chaotic home. My name is Jessica Hobbs. I know I may not look familiar to a lot of you, but I've been part of this MOPS group from the very beginning. I was with the group for a couple years when my boys were little, and then moved, and then I went back and had another baby, so I came back. I love this group so much, and I'm so thankful to be able to share with all of you guys. I'm going to read this because I don't want to ramble, for one, and there's some emotional parts that I'm not sure I'll make it through if I don't just read it. So, I was scheduled to speak at our MOPS meeting this last Friday, but because of this crazy world that we live in right now, that didn't happen. But I do feel like God really put some things on my heart to share, so I'm doing this video instead. And I hope that you watch it and that you take something away from what I have to say. This is kind of awkward and not what I'd hoped for, as I would much rather be in a room with you guys looking at your faces, but this is what we've got. So I'd also like to say I'm going to share some personal things with you in this video, so I'd like to ask that you please be thoughtful of that should you choose to share this with someone else. But I'd rather it not just be posted publicly on Facebook. So, thanks for understanding. I also feel like I need to give you a brief breakdown of my personal beliefs / theology so that you have a better understanding of where I'm coming from as I share. I've struggled over the years with the debates back and forth between topics like predestination and God's hand in events in our lives versus free will. Let me start by saying I believe that God is sovereign. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with this term, it means possessing supreme or ultimate power. I don't think that God is surprised by anything that happens in our lives, but I also believe that we live in a broken, fallen world, and bad things do happen to good people. I don't think that God makes these things happen, but I believe He allows them and uses them for His glory. But I also believe He's sad when we're sad. I think there's a balance between predestination and free will. I don't think there's a set line drawn between the two. I believe we are finite creatures, and we just will never fully understand our infinite God. But I trust Him completely. I trust Him because He has proven Himself worthy in my life, and in the lives of people I know, and in the lives of people in the Bible that I've read about, and I know that God is always good. So, that being said, I'm going to share my testimony and some of the incredible things that God has done in my life. I hope it will encourage you, even if it might seem discouraging in some points. I grew up in a Christian home. My parents had very sincere relationships with God and raised us to know the truth. And while I believed the truth and I had a relationship with God, I made a lot of really stupid choices. One of which led me to get pregnant at 15. I knew abortion was wrong, so even though I was pressured by my boyfriend and friends to abort, that was never an option for me. I chose adoption and placed my little girl Katie with a loving family that I chose through an adoption agency. And over the years, they sent me letters and pictures and updates as she grew up, so I always knew she was doing really well. We reconnected when she turned 17 because she wanted me to go to her high school graduation. And after meeting, our families became one again. We are just extended family now. We visit each other a couple times a year, and the boys have always referred to her as their sister. She's 25 now and teaches 5th grade and she just got married at the beginning of April. Unfortunately, we weren't able to go because of all of this, but she's going to have another big ceremony in July, so hopefully we can be there. And hopefully she doesn't make me a grandma anytime soon. But God totally redeemed this mistake that I made and turned it into something so beautiful. This part of my life has opened so many doors for me to minister to other young ladies facing the same situation and encourage them to choose life and provide them with the resources to help them succeed in their choice to choose life. In fact, after I graduated from high school, I went to work with the same ministry in East Texas that ran the adoption agency that worked with me. They also had a maternity home for young women facing unplanned pregnancies, and I worked there as a staff member for a couple years. Eventually, I moved back to Georgetown area, and that's when I met Colin. We met through a mutual friend, and I fell in love almost immediately. He, on the other hand, had no interest in a relationship at the time because he had great plans to be a rock star. We became best friends that would occasionally kiss, but it took about 5 years before he finally realized that being with me was better than being a rock star. So we made it official in February of 2008. In March of 2008, I got pregnant with twins. We had 2 kids before our first anniversary. Thankfully, we'd been friends long enough that we knew how to handle hard stuff together. But the struggle was still there. Colin had to work 2 jobs to help make ends meet, and we were getting burned out really quickly. We just never saw each other, and life was overwhelming us. Randomly, a friend of mine from the maternity home ministry reached out to me and told me that they didn't have any house parents to run the home and therefore couldn't take any girls. Immediately, we both felt like we needed to pursue this. We prayed and asked God for direction, and He opened all the doors for us to make this huge change to our lives. So within a month of hearing about it, we had packed up our house and our 2 3-year-olds and moved to East Texas to live in a maternity home. Our time doing ministry in East Texas was hard, but good at the same time. We had some amazing ministry opportunities, and we developed some relationships with girls that we still have today. But it's extremely hard to raise a family in an environment like that. And after a year living in the home, we decided to move and get our own house down the road, still working at the home during the day. Because we were in full-time ministry, we were responsible for raising our own support. Over time, our support dwindled, and Colin had to get a part-time job at Lowe's to help make ends meet. We started to find ourselves in the same place we were before, spending more time working than we were spending together as a family. Then, in May 2015, we were hit by a tornado that destroyed our small town. We were miraculously protected, and while our house was severely damaged, we were unharmed. The recovery from such a traumatic event was hard, though. Not only were we having to coordinate all the repair work, but the boys and I started having sleeping issues and just other anxiety and things like that. It was a very stressful time. After about a year, we decided that something had to change. I asked my parents to pray for us because we didn't really have any other options, and they offered to help us move back to the Georgetown area. Excited about the possibility, I talked to Colin when he got home from work that night. Somehow, in the midst of that conversation and talking about our future and what choices we had to make, I discovered that Colin had had an inappropriate relationship with a girl at work. I was devastated. He was someone I thought that I could always trust, and I didn't know what to do. We started talking about what to do next, and he just seemed completely disconnected. He had no interest in going to counseling or making it work. He just didn't care. I sat there and cried and prayed. I felt like God told me to tell him that if he wanted out, he was going to have to leave, but I wasn't going anywhere. And something about me saying that broke him. We were able to talk and cry together, and we realized that we'd both gotten so consumed with life that we were completely neglecting each other. We'd become roommates raising kids together. It wasn't all his fault. It wasn't all my fault. We'd both made mistakes. We made new commitments to each other to do a better job communicating and paying attention to each other. And it was amazing how God moved and healed the hurts that were there quickly. Over the next week, we grew closer than we'd been in years. We agreed to still get help and support to help us rebuild our relationship, but we were headed in the right direction. And we also agreed that we needed to get out of East Texas and get back to Georgetown, where we had a better support system. So, the next part of the story is kind of hard to explain, and I'm not sure how much detail to share because it was all just very shocking. Colin was given the opportunity to start a new career as an electrician, training with a small company that my brother worked for. He was super excited about this, and we knew it would be a really good choice for our family in the long run. But we knew that starting pay for an electrician apprentice would not be enough to afford life in Georgetown. My parents, again, offered to help until we could afford things, even allowing us to move in with them until our house in East Texas sold. So, my parents at this time had recently retired, and we knew that they'd been having some difficulties relationally, but we all just figured it was them adjusting to being together all the time again. I mean, they'd, both been working for so many years, and now all of a sudden they had nothing to do but hang out. So, but upon moving in with them, we realized there was much more going on. My mother was a very different person than who I had known my whole life. And we began to see some very alarming behavior that seemed to be some sort of mental health issue. Over the next few months, things only got worse, escalating to the point where she became so violent with my dad one day that I had to call the police to control her. All of this happened while my boys were home. It was awful. And then, in the middle of all this struggle, trying to figure out what was happening to my mother, I found out I was pregnant. The timing was less than ideal. The boys were 9 years old, and we didn't think we were having any more children. And now this was the time that God chose. I didn't understand, but I tried to focus on the joy and, just really cherish my pregnancy with this unexpected child. Over the next few months, we had many ups and downs with my mother. She moved into several different assisted living facilities, but was kicked out of all of them because she would start to show strange paranoid behavior, almost schizophrenic, and they didn't know how to deal with her. She pushed my dad away, but then would want him back when she needed something. It was so hard on all of us, but it was heartbreaking for him. He was so in love with my mom. She was his girl, and this was just devastating for him that suddenly she was a different person and she wanted nothing to do with him. Doctors would think they had found the reason for her behavior and the right treatment, but then she tests negative for whatever they thought it was. We had no answers and no idea how to move forward. But eventually she agreed that she wanted to live with my dad again, and they ended up getting an apartment together. And we bought their house from them. It was a stressful solution, but we didn't know what else to do. And then Millie was born. Every interaction I'd had with my mom at this point was extremely stressful. I didn't know what to say because any little thing might set her off on a tangent. But when we were together with this sweet new baby, there was peace. It was incredible. God knew that we needed this baby in our life at this very difficult time. She brought us all joy and allowed us to spend time together without anger and confusion. And she was an incredible blessing from God. Sorry. I'm going to get emotional. After a few more months, we started to see some improvement in my mom. Her erratic behavior became less frequent, and we began to see some light at the end of the tunnel. Deep breath. Then, one night in August 2018, just a year and a half ago, she woke my dad up because she had pressure in her chest. They called an ambulance, and she went to the hospital. They determined she had some fluid around her heart and it needed to be drained. After a few days in the ICU, they decided to release her, saying that she was doing fine. My dad headed to the hospital to bring her home. It was a Sunday morning, and Colin had already gone to church to set up the drums for worship. I was home getting the kids ready to go, and my brother called. He asked if I was sitting down and said, "Mom just died." I didn't know what to do. I hung up and called Colin and told him my mom had died. What weird words to say to someone. He rushed home and I headed to the hospital. My dad had been in the elevator headed up to get her when they tried to call him. She had gone to the bathroom before heading home, and the nurse heard her collapse, and she was gone. Excuse me. That was it. Her heart had failed. The nurse had to stop my dad in the hallway to let him know what happened, and he didn't know how to even process what she told him. He was on his way to pick her up. Sorry, tissue. The next few days and weeks were kind of a blur, and there was a weird sense of relief because of how hard the last few years had been. We knew she was in a better place finally, and there was a lot of comfort that came from that. But then there were the moments where I remembered the mom I grew up with, and I missed her. I hated that Millie wouldn't remember her, and that I couldn't call her with all my mom questions. But, as any of you who have lost someone knows, life doesn't just stop because you're grieving. In December of that same year, just a few months after we lost my mom, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer. It was not aggressive, and he was given at least 2 to 5 more years. He found a great oncologist and started treatment. None of us were scared. I have 2 brothers. That's who us are. We knew that God was bigger than all this, and we could trust him with my dad. Fast forward a couple months, and I started to feel really sick, like I had mono. Then I got pneumonia. I'd had pneumonia before, so I wasn't surprised. I knew what to do with pneumonia. I went to the doctor, and I got some antibiotics, and I went home to rest. My cousin came to visit, and after a few days on the medicine, I wasn't feeling better, and I'd started coughing up blood. She told me she was taking a week off work to help with the kids so I could rest, but to go to the ER and get checked out again. My dad was going to drive me, but I couldn't even walk out to the car because I was headed to the hospital. Because I couldn't breathe. So we called an ambulance to take me. I called Colin at work and told him I was headed to the hospital. He said he'd head that way, but he was in Austin, so it'd take him a bit. When he got there, they had done some blood work, and we were waiting on the results. We sat and waited a few minutes, and Colin said he wanted to run home to shower real quick because he'd been working in an attic and was covered in insulation. It looked like it could be a while, and our house was only 5 minutes away, so that seemed fine, so I told him to go. But before he made it back, the doctor came back with a look of panic on his face. He told me that my blood counts were way off, and they were concerned that I might have leukemia. I don't think I even knew what leukemia really was. But also that my lungs were filling with fluid so fast that they needed to sedate me and intubate me immediately so that they could suck the fluid out. I asked if I could wait until my husband got back, and he said he'd rather not wait. It was pretty urgent. So I walked into the other room, laid down on a table, and they knocked me out. I woke up a week later. Sorry. When I woke up, Colin was there, holding my hand and crying tears of joy. He told me that I for sure had leukemia and that I'd almost died.
He told me I was getting chemo. And he told me that I was now in South Austin in the ICU. He told me that his dad was staying at our house with the kids. And then he told me about all of the amazing things that God had been doing. More tissue. He told me people had held a 36-hour prayer vigil for me. He told me that our church and MOPS friends had been bringing meals to my family and had signed up to continue for the next 2 months. He told me that people had sent financial gifts to help with any unexpected expenses. He told me that his boss had given him the next 2 weeks off with pay. And on and on. Now, before this, I had really been struggling with self-esteem issues. My mother had said some really hurtful things. I think just in the midst of her mental illness. And I'd had a falling out with my brother and his family over some things that his wife had said to me. I was still struggling with some of the things that Colin and I had walked through, and I was feeling lonely and worthless. But then I woke up and I heard of all the incredible things that people were doing for our family because they loved me. God was using this awful situation to show me how loved I was. I was in the hospital, away from my family for a month, initially, getting that treatment, recovering. Yeah, it was the hardest time of my life. But God was so faithful to show up, you guys. He put me with the best doctors for my disease that I could have been with. I mean, really, I didn't choose them, I randomly ended up with them, and they are at the top of their game for what I was being treated for, the type of leukemia I have and what I needed. So I was really able to focus on getting better because I knew that God was taking care of my family, even though I missed them terribly. And God continued to perform miracles. Oh my gosh, so many. When I was first admitted, we were uninsured. It was just one of those things because we couldn't afford insurance and the kids were covered by CHIP that we just thought it would be okay. Without going into all the details, we were able to get me signed up for insurance by the time I was released from the hospital. So we knew I'd be able to continue getting the treatment I needed moving forward. So once I was home, I started dealing with all the bills that started rolling in while getting treatments, continuing to get chemo and things like that. The total of all the bills came to about $800,000. I started with the hospital and filled out their financial aid application. Everyone told me that they would sometimes forgive up to 80% of someone's bill, so we were hoping and praying that we would be some of those people. Then one day I got a letter in the mail saying that they had forgiven 100% of our bill, just over $715,000. This letter then enabled me to get many other bills forgiven, and we went from about $800,000 in medical debt to about $8,000 total in the end. God was so faithful, guys. And he kept showing up. There was the medication I needed that cost $16,000 a month. I found out that the manufacturers would provide it for free if I just filled out an application proving we couldn't afford that. Someone paid for the rest of Millie's preschool tuition for the year. Someone paid our mortgage 1 month. People sent financial gifts and gift cards that provided just what we needed exactly when we needed them. And people continued to bring meals, and people continued to take our kids places and do things with them and just love on us. Colin's dad was staying with us to help with the kids while I recovered, and he's not a Christian. He pulled Colin aside one day and said, "I don't understand what's happening here. I have never seen anything like this. I've never seen people take care of someone like this, and I didn't know Christians could be like this." Colin was able to tell him, this is what Christians are supposed to be, and it was an incredible testimony to him. I know there are more things that God has done over the last year, but I can't remember all the details. I just know that he has always been faithful. So after I was released from the hospital, it was determined that I would need a stem cell transplant. Stem cell transplant is what they do instead of a bone marrow transplant. Now, we can talk details sometime if you're interested. But I began monthly chemo sessions to knock out the remaining leukemia cells in order to prepare my body for new bone marrow. I won't share all the details. Again, I'd be happy to share them with you sometime. But my body was finally ready for transplant in September, just this last September, and I headed back to the hospital for another month. There were such mixed emotions going back to the hospital. I knew I needed the procedure to get better, but I hated leaving my family again. I knew that I would be gone at least 3 weeks, probably more. I played a lot of worship music, and I spent a lot of time in prayer to get through that time. While I was in the hospital, my dad's cancer was progressing to a point where he realized that he needed more help than either he or I could provide at the time. And so he decided to move in with his sister and her husband in Oklahoma. He had to move while I was still in the hospital, and I had an infection, and he couldn't come and see me, and so I didn't get to say a proper goodbye. But we planned for him to visit soon. So I was released after 3 weeks, and then there are various treatments that go on after that. But the first 100 days after transplant are the most important. If the cancer is going to return, that's most likely when it would come, or when it would happen. My 100-day bone marrow biopsy came back clear, and we've had some complications, but my body seems to be healing now, and my doctors are very encouraged that we have beat this thing. So praise the Lord. I'm officially cancer-free, and so now it's just fixing the things that we broke to get rid of the cancer. And thank Jesus. But this brings me to the last month or so. I've been in constant contact with my dad since he moved, but because of both of our health issues, we just haven't been able to visit each other. We FaceTimed, and we've texted, and we've called. And then at the end of February, he was starting to have more issues with mobility and fuzzy brain than he'd had before. His oncologist recommended that we do an MRI of his brain to see if there were any changes from his last scan. Within a week, he had lost more mobility, and so they didn't even do the MRI. They told us that they pretty much knew that the cancer had spread to his brain, and at this point, there wasn't really anything else we could do. Sorry. On March 10th, he went home to be with Jesus. He went peacefully to sleep, surrounded by his family. My brother was holding his hand. The boys and I, Millie and Colin, had all said goodbye. And he loved Jesus. So I know he's in heaven. I know he's with my mom. And I know he's with his parents. And I know that brings me some comfort. And in time it will help more. But right now I really miss him terribly. He was my person. Other than Colin, he was my best friend. And he gave really good advice, and I just miss him. I want to send him pictures of the kids. And so it's hard. The grief is still very new, and the loss is very fresh. But I feel like God really wanted me to share all of this with you. Sorry, my nose. And I know that a lot of my story might seem tragic, and that there's a lot of pain and a lot of loss. But what I really want you to take away from all of this is how faithful God is, even when things are incredibly hard. He loves us so much. Several people have brought up the saying that God will not give us more than we can handle during this hard time we are all going through. because that's just not true. God will not give us more than He can handle. And He's the one that carries us through the hard times. I also want you to realize how important community is. I couldn't have made it through any of these things if we hadn't been surrounded by people that loved us and lifted us up in prayer. I know that everyone is going through a hard time right now, feeling lonely and isolated and unsure of the future. But guys, I want to encourage you to really press into God during this time and give Him all those feelings. He's so big, and He'll carry the hard stuff for you. And He provides for us by putting people in our lives to help carry that burden. So please don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. Whether it's physical help or just asking someone to pray for you. I want to encourage you also to reach out to others and see how they're doing and how you can support them. It can really feel lonely in the midst of hard times, and you often feel like you've been forgotten. But just knowing that other people are thinking about you can help you through those really hard days. There have been days where I've just sat in my living room crying because I was so overwhelmed with life and emotions. And a text from a friend was so helpful in getting me through the rest of that day. Or someone offering to stop by and bring me lunch or coffee. Sometimes I think we tell ourselves that if we can't do the big things, then it's not really helpful. But I want to encourage you that the small things mean so much too. So if God brings someone to mind, don't be afraid to send them a quick text to check in on them or offer to bring them a coffee or whatever else might be helpful. Gosh, I feel like I don't even make sense anymore with my stuffed up nose. So, yeah, thanks for listening to me ramble and watching me cry. And again, I wish we could have done this in person. But please feel free to reach out to me if this encouraged you, or if you have questions, or you want me to pray for you, or you just want to visit. I know we can't get together in person right now, but I'm very good at socializing while in quarantine. And I look forward to when we can see each other in person and hug and share and visit and hang out together. I love you guys, and I'm so thankful for you. And just know that I'm praying for you. Bye.